It is a silent, sneaky, yet incredibly common pattern. When everything finally starts to go right in a person's life, something within them seems to sabotage the progress. A wrong decision, an unnecessary fight, a mistake that could have been avoided. Almost imperceptibly, the mind itself seems to find ways to make everything go away. And the most unsettling part, this usually happens at the moments when they are closest to achieving what they have always dreamed of. According to Gay Hendricks, author of the book The Big Leap, this tendency towards self-sabotage is no coincidence, nor is it weakness or bad luck. It is a deep psychological mechanism he called the upper limit problem. It's as if each person has an internal thermostat that determines how much success, love, and well-being they allow themselves to experience. When life begins to exceed this limit, when everything starts to go too well, this invisible system kicks in and pulls the person back to a more familiar and safe state, even if that state is one of pain, scarcity, or mediocrity. Hendricks asserts that this internal limit was built long before we became aware of it. Shaped by beliefs inherited in childhood, by messages we received from our parents, teachers, and society. Phrases like, "don't want too much," "don't show off," "don't be greedy," end up rooting themselves as silent truths that later transform into emotional blocks. And when reality begins to contradict these beliefs, the unconscious enters into conflict, generating guilt, fear, and sabotage. This sabotage can take many forms, from an unexpected failure after a major professional success to the abrupt end of a relationship that finally seemed healthy. It can be an emotional crisis that arises out of nowhere, a mysterious illness, or a series of bad decisions that don't seem to make sense rationally. But all these manifestations have something in common. They are unconscious attempts to keep us within our comfortable limit of happiness. The most alarming thing, according to Hendricks, is that this mechanism affects even the most successful people. The more you grow, the more urgent it becomes to identify and transcend this internal limit. Otherwise, you will continue to oscillate between temporary achievements and painful setbacks, always trapped in a cycle where success is allowed only up to a certain point, the point at which you still feel safe. This video is a deep dive into this psychological dynamic. An analysis based on the work of Gay Hendricks to understand why we sabotage ourselves just when we are about to win. And more importantly, how to identify this pattern in your life and how to start breaking it. Because as Hendricks warns us, it is not enough to just dream of success. You must learn to sustain it. And for that, you will have to challenge the deepest beliefs you hold about yourself. Gay Hendricks states clearly, each of us has an inner thermostat setting that determines how much love, success, and creativity we allow ourselves to enjoy. This statement, simple at first glance, carries a disturbing truth. Because this inner thermostat is not conscious. It is a deep psychological mechanism built from limiting beliefs and emotional experiences that have shaped how you interpret success, happiness, and even love. And the most frightening part, it is active all the time, silently controlling the limits of how much good you allow yourself to experience. This invisible problem is what Hendricks calls the upper limit problem. The central idea is that each individual carries within them a maximum point of well-being that they consider acceptable. When life begins to exceed this point, whether through a professional advancement, an explosion of love, or a period of intense joy, the subconscious interprets this excess of positivity as a threat. And then it springs into action, seeking to restore internal balance. However, this balance is not always healthy. It is often just familiar. Hendricks writes, when we hit our upper limit, we do something that stops our positive forward trajectory. In other words, it is not the outside world that sabotages our growth. It is ourselves, on a deep and automatic level. We create problems where none existed, start meaningless arguments, procrastinate, distract ourselves with trivialities, become ill, or simply lose enthusiasm. And the cruelest part, all of this can happen just when we are finally on the right path. This limit has been conditioned in us from an early age. If, in childhood, we were punished for standing out, praised for being modest, or ignored when we expressed our ambitions, we learned that shining too brightly is dangerous. If our happiness caused discomfort at home, we learned that being happy can lead to rejection. Hendricks reports, "Our upper limit thermostat setting holds us back from enjoying all the love, financial abundance, and creativity that's rightfully ours." In other words, you can achieve success, but you cannot enjoy it. You can experience great love, but feel guilty for being so happy. You can have money, but fear losing it. The problem is not outside, it is inside. And why is this problem so hard to perceive? Because it disguises itself. It takes on rational, logical forms. Failure seems just like bad luck. A sudden breakup seems like incompatibility. Procrastination seems like lack of motivation. But deep down, all of this may be the expression of the same mechanism. The unconscious attempt to keep everything within the limit it considers safe. And here is the most important point. This limit is completely arbitrary. It was learned, it is not real. And if it was learned, it can be reprogrammed. But for that, you first need to learn to recognize the ways in which self-sabotage manifests in your life. Because as long as this problem remains invisible, it will continue to control you. In the next chapter, we will explore exactly that. How self-sabotage disguises itself in daily life. How it sneaks into your routine, your relationships, your health, and even your victories. And what you can do to start seeing it. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. Self-sabotage is a subtle art. It rarely presents itself as an obvious force that prevents you from moving forward. On the contrary, it is camouflaged, elegant, often rational. Most people do not realize they are self-sabotaging until it is too late. But according to Gay Hendricks, self-sabotage is the main symptom of the upper limit problem. He states, "We do something to mess it up. We manufacture thoughts and behaviors that bring us back down." This return to the known can manifest in various ways. One of the most common is excessive worry. When everything starts to flow well, your mind begins to invent problems. You find yourself reliving old conversations, imagining catastrophic scenarios, worrying about irrelevant details. Hendricks recounts a revealing personal experience. After a peaceful lunch with a friend and in a moment of complete satisfaction, his mind was invaded by images of his daughter facing difficulties. The feeling of joy was replaced in seconds by anguish. He realized he had exceeded his internal limit of well-being and that his own brain was manufacturing worries to bring him back to his usual state. Another common example of self-sabotage is conflict. After a moment of great harmony in a relationship, an unnecessary argument arises. A cutting comment, a sudden demand, an untimely irritation. You don't know where it came from, but the effect is clear. The mood changes, the connection is broken, and again, you return to the comfort of emotional instability. Hendricks explains, "We enjoy a period of relationship harmony, then stop the flow of connection by criticizing or starting an argument." Self-sabotage also appears as procrastination. You know what you need to do, have the tools, the time, and the ability, but you delay. You make excuses. You become paralyzed. Why? Because completing that task will take you to a new level of success, and your internal thermostat may not be ready for that. You fear the positive consequences as much as you fear the negative ones, and it doesn't stop there. Self-sabotage can infiltrate your health. You neglect yourself just when you start to feel better. In your habits, you break a productive routine after a series of victories. In your dreams, You back away from the opportunity you've always wanted, claiming that it's not the right time yet. The crucial point is that all these actions are not random. They are automatic responses to a single trigger, the approach of something greater, more positive, more fulfilling. What Hendricks calls the upper limit switch is activated when your success threatens to exceed the limits that your mind believes you deserve. Each time you consciously let yourself enjoy the money you have, the love you feel, and the creativity you are expressing, your capacity expands, writes Hendricks. But the reverse is also true. Each time you self-sabotage, you reinforce the limit. You reaffirm to your unconscious that you cannot, that you should not, that you do not deserve. Now that you begin to recognize the various masks of self-sabotage, the next step is even deeper, to discover where and how this limit was created. Because only by understanding the origin of the problem can you deactivate it definitively. In the next part, we will delve into the emotional roots of the upper limit problem, the beliefs learned in childhood, the invisible loyalties, the silent pacts that continue to limit your adult life. The human mind is not born with limits, it learns them. And according to Gay Hendricks, the upper limit problem is, in fact, a direct reflection of the emotional programming you received in your early years of life. Those messages that did not necessarily come through words, but through facial expressions, silences, subtle punishments, or conditional praise. It is in this fertile ground of childhood that your mind learned, silently, to limit itself. If you were a child who felt guilty when receiving praise because you noticed it bothered your siblings, or if you realized that your parents became tense when you stood out too much, then you learned that being too much can be dangerous. You created an internal pact of restraint, an unconscious commitment not to exceed certain limits to avoid hurting anyone, not being rejected, or not being seen as selfish. Self-sabotage, in this context, is an act of invisible loyalty. Gay Hendricks describes this brutally honestly. Our upper limit thermostat setting holds us back from enjoying all the love, financial abundance, and creativity that's rightfully ours. It keeps us in our zone of competence, or at best our zone of excellence. It prevents us from living in the ultimate destination of the journey, our zone of genius. This thermostat is not rational. It was shaped by the need for acceptance. It dictates how far you can grow before you start to disturb others. And the most insidious part, even if intellectually you desire success, love, money, and fulfillment, this childhood code continues to operate behind the scenes, pulling the reins every time you approach something grand. Most people carry this programming throughout their lives without knowing it. They think they are being humble, realistic, sensible. But in reality, they are just obeying old orders. Orders that once made sense to a 5- or 6-year-old child, but that no longer serve today, and only cause stagnation. Over time, this internal structure becomes almost sacred. The idea of allowing yourself more pleasure, more recognition, more freedom provokes guilt. Expansion begins to feel like betrayal, and then the mind does what it has always done. It retreats. But what if you could identify this pattern? What if it were possible to question this old agreement? In the next section, you will discover what it really means to surpass this limit and how to begin the journey to your big leap, the ultimate jump beyond self-sabotage.